A large portion of the Jewish nation has returned to its homeland, but the heart, soul, and mind of much of the Jewish nation are still in exile mode. This state of affairs must and will inevitably change. This is Torah Nation TV from Jerusalem, and we are speaking with the head of Machon, Shilo, Rabbi David Bar-Hayim. Shalom, Rabbi Bar-Hayim.
Shalom.
Until when can one daven shacharit? Until when can one daven mincha? Or can one daven any time, night or day?
With regards to shacharit, the Mishnah states at the beginning of the fourth chapter of Masechet Berachot, the Mishnah states, Tefilat HaShahar ad Hasoth, Rabbi Yehuda Omer ad Arba Sha'oth. In other words, we have two opinions. The general majority opinion that Tefilat Shacharit is till midday, till noon, which we will define in a moment. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's till 4 hours of the day. This also has to be defined. In Halacha, all miswoth, all the commandments that we perform that are time sensitive are dependent upon the Halachic system of time, which is really not a particularly Jewish or Halachic system of time, but it was the way the time was counted in the ancient world, based on what we would call today a sundial. A sundial, after all, measures the day, or divides the day into 12 equal parts, based on the movement of the sun and the shadow cast by the sun and by the upright piece on the sundial, the shadow cast on that dial, that tells you the hour of the day. Obviously, in the summer months when the day is longer, each of those 12 hours, which in Hebrew is called a sha'az zamanith, that is to say a relative time-sensitive hour, each of those hours is longer, and in the winter each of those hours is shorter. So we're not talking about an absolute measure of time, we're talking about a relative measure of time on any given day. According to this system, 0 hours at the beginning of each day is sunrise, and 12 hours is sunset. There are other opinions in the realm of Halacha, with which I am of course familiar, but I'm giving you now the bottom line that one needs to know Halacha l'ma'aseh, and there is no doubt whatever that is the correct position. 0 hours is sunrise, 12 hours is sunset. It also therefore follows that noon is 6 hours. The end of the 6th hour is noon, precisely, when the sun is at its highest point in the sky on that day. The other opinion to which I referred is the opinion that is usually associated with the Magen Avraham, which claims that the measurement of the hours of the day begins not at sunrise but at dawn, at first light, which in Israel at least on an average day of the year is approximately an hour and a quarter before sunrise, and the end of the day, that is to say the end of the 12 hours of those sha'ot zmaniyot, those relative hours of any given day, is when the sky is totally dark, that is to say when all light has left even the western part of the sky where the sun set, when the entire sky from east to west is dark. That, according to this other opinion, is the end of the halachic day, and that is 12 hours. There are many reasons why this opinion is without a doubt incorrect, but I will simply quote here one of the major poskim and major halachic and Talmudic and philosophic authorities in Judaism, Rav Saadia Gaon. This is a source that is not commonly known and was not known to many of the poskim who over the last several centuries discussed this matter, and we will see that this is his view, and I will read it for you now. Sidur Rav Saadia Gaon. Rav Saadia Gaon lived in the 10th century. He writes on page 12 of his Sidur, I read in Hebrew and translate. וזמן הבוקר שבו חייבים בקריאה ובתפילה מזריחת השמש עד סוף השעה הרביעית של היום. Here he's discussing the time frame for Tefillat Shacharit, for the morning prayer, and he says the time for this prayer is from the rising of the sun until the end of the 4th hour, which we'll explain in a moment. And he goes on to say, Utahilat on page 13, Utahilat hanes hahama b'chol makom hi tahilat zamane kri'a wa tefillah. So Rav Saadia Gaon states clearly that the Halachic clock, which measures every day from sunrise to sunset and then divides that day into 12 equal parts, that clock begins to run, as it were, from sunrise and ends at sunset. And there's another quote which I will quote in a moment to further prove this point. So Rav Saadia Gaon there, referring to the morning prayer, Tefillat Shacharit, he says the time for this prayer is from sunrise, which we said is 0 hours. If we divide the time from sunrise to sunset on an average day of the year in Israel, that would be 12 hours exactly. So if we're talking about an average day of the year, in other words, around spring or autumn, then 4 hours of the day would be 10 a.m. So the end of the time for praying Shacharit is 4 hours of the day, which would be the way, let's say, an ancient Roman would also tell the time. He would look at a sundial and see, one third of the day has passed, and that would be marked off on the dial as the end of the 4th hour of the day. But that is the opinion, as we mentioned before, of Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah, who said that the morning prayer may be said ad arba sha'oth, till the end of the 4th hour. But the opinion of the Chachamim, the majority opinion, was till hasoth. And in fact, this is an interesting point, which is also not generally known, and that is that the Talmudim, the Talmud Bavli and the Talmud Yerushalmi, disagree on this issue. The Talmud Bavli, as quoted here, as we just mentioned by Rav Saadia Gaon, and as understood by all the Gaonim, including Rav Hai Gaon and the Halachot Gedolot, was that the Talmud Bavli is posek halacha according to Rabbi Yehuda. That is to say, one may not pray beyond the 4th hour. If one did not say Tefillat Shacharit by 10 a.m. on an average day of the year, then one may not daven the Shmoneh Esrei for the morning beyond that time. One must wait till the time for Minha in order to make up for that loss. The opinion of the Talmud Yerushalmi, however, here as almost with every other sugya, is that the halacha is like the Mishnah, the majority opinion of the Mishnah, what we call the Satam Mishnah, or the Tanakama, and that opinion states that one may daven till noon. So one has an extra 2 hours to pray. And interestingly enough, even though it's difficult to explain this position of the Rif and the Rambam, but these two major poskim took the view that one should try and daven lechat hila, one should pray till the end of the 4th hour, but if one was not able to do so, one may, b'di avad, one may daven for another 2 hours till noon. And this is the standard halacha. So practically speaking, without the world, so to speak, the Jewish world, without knowing it, is following the view of the Talmud Yerushalmi, essentially, on this issue. With regards to Minha, Minha does not begin immediately at noon, but rather a half an hour after noon. And this is because of the fact that people used to tell the time, as we said, by looking at the sun and its position in the sky, and people were not always able to distinguish whether the sun had passed the midpoint or was just before the midpoint. And so the sages said we must wait half an hour after noon to make sure that the sun has now shifted towards the west, that it's in the second half of its path across the sky, and then one may pray the afternoon prayer. Minha may therefore be said from 6.5 hours, that's half an hour after noon, until the end of the day, which we said is 12 hours. And as we said, these 12 hours end at sunset. And this too is stated explicitly by Rabbi Saadia Gaon, and I will quote this for you as well. On page 26 of his Sidur, he writes as follows: Uzman ben hashemashot shemitparalim bo et hatefila hazot, the time for the afternoon period when this tefillah, that is to say minha, is to be said, Mishin nikeret yiridat hahama, from the time that one can perceive that the sun has begun to move towards the west, so just after noon. And this means from the second half of the 7th hour, as we just explained, until the setting of the sun. Those are the express words of Rav Sa'adia Gaon. This alone, these clear statements by Rav Sa'adia Gaon, perhaps the greatest of the Gaonim, certainly one of the greatest of the Gaonim and the Rishonim and of Chachmei Israel, of the sages of the Jewish people of all time, these statements alone would be sufficient to tilt the balance amongst the different poskim who have discussed this subject. As we mentioned, this alone would be sufficient to tilt the balance in favor of that opinion. As I said, there are also many other reasons and proofs that this is so, and this was the opinion of the Gra, the Gaon of Vilna, is also the view of the Baal HaTanya, and many other poskim. There's no doubt that this is the correct halacha l'maaseh. So Minha may be said, according to the Mishnah, moving now to Tefilat Minha, that same Mishnah we quoted before states, Tefilat Minha al ha'arev, that Tefilat Minha may be said till the evening. Evening here means sunset. Rabbi Yehuda Omer al Plagha Minha, and Rabbi Yehuda here also has a different opinion and says till Plagha Minha. Plagha Minha means half of the Minha, and I will explain what is being said here. The term Minha essentially refers first and foremost to a specific period of the day, that is to say the second half of the afternoon. If the afternoon begins at noon and ends at sunset, the time for Minha would begin at 9.5 hours, that is to say on an average day of the year when sunrise is at 6 a.m. and sunset is at 6 p.m. This would be 3:30 p.m. in the afternoon. That is the beginning of what's called Minha, the time of the day referred to as Minha, and the end of that period of Minha is a sunset, which is 12 hours. According to Rabbi Yehuda, we take that period of 2.5 hours, from 9.5 to 12 hours, and we divide it in two down the middle, and that first half, 1.25 hours, in other words, from 9.5 to 10.75 hours, that only is the time for reciting the Minha prayer. And therefore one understands that the period for reciting Minha, according to Rabbi Yehuda, is very brief. And according to the Chachamim too, according to the majority opinion, the ideal time for reciting Minha, although b'di'avad, under certain circumstances, one may say it all of the afternoon, from 6.5 hours, from just afternoon until sunset. Nevertheless, the proper time would be from 9.5 till sunset, and that is called Zman Minha Ketana. The halacha is that one may conduct oneself either according to the Chachamim or according to Rabbi Yehuda. So it states in the Talmud Bavli explicitly, the avad kemar avad, or the avad kemar avad, so it says in the Talmud. And the same is true also in the Talmud Yerushalmi. We see that acting in accordance with the Rabbi Yehuda was also an option. So this is an instance of a halacha where the halacha was not felt necessary by the Chachamim to lay down one view as the halacha, but this issue was left open. The end of Zman Minha, the end of the time for davening Minha, therefore, is sunset. And sunset, by the way, is defined halachically as the son of the Rambam, Rabbi Avraham, states explicitly in a well-known responsum. The sun is considered to have set only when the disk of the sun, which we can see with our eyes when it is setting, when that has sunk entirely, all of that disk has sunk below the horizon, that is the moment of Shiki'at HaHama, the moment of sunset, and that is the end of the day, and that is the end of the clock, so to speak. That is the end of the 12th hour. So as long as you can see the sun or any part of it, it is still not considered to be Shiki'at HaHama, and that is the end of the time for praying Minha according to the Chachamim. And from that moment onwards, immediately begins the time for davening Arvith. That is to say, the evening prayer, which, in terms of its time frame, is the most generous. You have the most time to daven Arvith, much more than Shaharith or Minha, certainly, is all night, and that period actually begins from sunset till the following day at dawn. So if a person mistakenly thinks he can pray minha after the sun sets, his prayer is very wonderful and very acceptable before Hashem, but he has to know that he didn't daven minha, he actually just prayed arvith. As a certain rabbi once said to me, very perceptively, one can actually daven any time, night or day. The only question is, what did you daven? Was it shaharith? Was it minha? Was it arvith? And with the exception of that half hour, right after midday, as I explained, he was entirely correct. So if a person prays after sunset, after the Shki'at HaHama, that is arvith. Whether he intends it to be so or not, that is in fact arvith. So if one wants to daven minha, one has to do so before the sun sets. And the time for Tefillat Arvith is not the same as the time for Kriyat Shema. These are two distinct miswot. The beginning of the time, the Zman for Kriyat Shema in the evening is Seta Kochavim, when 3 stars appear after sunset, and this does not happen immediately after sunset unless one lives right at the equator. But this happens sometime after sunset. Again, how long after sunset depends on one's geographical location on the globe and the season of the year. Here in Israel, for example, in the middle of winter, the time period from sunset to the appearance of 3 stars is something in the vicinity of 16-17 minutes. In the middle of the summer, the time is closer to half an hour, certainly over 25 minutes. The Rambam writes in Hilchot Terumot Perek Zayin that the time from sunset to the appearance of 3 stars is approximately a third of an hour, and that's entirely correct. The Rambam was probably referring, one must assume, to an average day of the year, and it is approximately 20 minutes in Eretz Yisrael on average day of the year. And I have tested this and timed this and checked this myself on many, many occasions at different times of the year, and this is what I have found. So, to sum up, the miswah of Kriyat Shema and the miswah of Tefillat Arvith, also, by the way, the miswah of Kriyat Shema in the morning and the miswah of Tefillat Shaharith in the morning, these are 2 separate miswot, which we often tend to juxtapose, but they are not in fact one and the same at all, and the halachic parameters in terms of the time frame, etc., are also not the same, and one has to be aware of this fact. As for Shaharith, as we said, according to the Mishnah and according to the Talmud Yerushalmi, one may pray till noon, and this is also the accepted halachic view based on the Rif and the Rambam. And as for minha, one must pray minha well before the sun sets, so that one completes the tefillah before the sun sets. If one did not do so and prayed after the sun sets, then in fact that was arvith. Those are the halachic facts and figures which every Jew should be familiar with and take into account when he or she comes to pray before Hashem.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the Rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the Rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.